March 28, 1990, Michael Jordan scored a career high of 69 points in a single game, leading the Chicago Bulls to a 117 to 113 point win over the Cleveland Cavaliers. Years later, Stacey King, who had been a rookie that season and had scored only a single free throw in that game, was asked the highlight of his career, and he gave a witty reply saying he would always remember that night he and Michael Jordan combined for 70 points. As if 69 points and 1 point were equal contributions. Now, although he was joking, I think his statement is a reflection of the human tendency to take credit however we can and to inflate our roles and feed our egos. And that's just an appetizer, leaving us always wanting more. The problem is, how do we factor God into the equation? A lot of the time, we may verbally give God the credit and give God the glory, but is that really all there is to it? Is that all we have to do? Or could it be that we're still trying to share the credit and steal the spotlight? Turn with me to Judges chapter 6. We're going to be looking at a story that may be familiar to you. It's the story of Gideon. And the story takes up about 3 chapters. Don't worry, I'm not going to read all 3 chapters, but I'll read some excerpts. We'll jump around a little bit, and I'll summarize where I can. But just keep your Bibles open, and we'll be in Judges chapters 6, 7, and 8. And this story of Gideon challenges the assumptions we make about how we recognize and respond to God's work in our lives. Now, the book of Judges has a pattern that just keeps repeating itself. Israel sins, God punishes Israel, the Israelites cry out to God for help, God has mercy on them and raises up someone, a judge, to lead them back to God and deliver them and to help rule over them. Israel succeeds and prospers until they sin again, and the cycle repeats. Judges 6 begins no differently. Verse 1. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them or their camels. They had invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out from before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live, but you have not listened to me." The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you." Once again, the Israelites have sinned, and God raised up an enemy, this time the Midianites. The Israelites fled to the mountains, and the Midianites besieged them, destroying all their crops and their livestock. And the Midianites were innumerable, like swarms of locusts, the text describes. And this lasted for 7 years. Now, this is actually the shortest period of oppression in the entire book of Judges, but this is much worse than anything else they would experience. So the Israelites cried out to God for help. Now, this is the 5th go-around of this cycle of sin, punishment, and deliverance, but it's only the first time that God responded to the Israelites' pleas with a rebuke. "I brought you out of Egypt. I rescued you. I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship other gods. But you have not listened to me." I think what he's trying to say is, you have not listened to me, so why should I now listen to you? But God, in his great mercy, once again showed grace to his people and raised up another judge to deliver them from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon and said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." And Gideon replied, "If God is with us, then why has this happened to us? Why is he letting the Midianites do this to us? Didn't he bring us up out of Egypt? He must have the power to do something. He's shown it before. So why hasn't he rescued us now?" And Gideon concludes, well, clearly he's abandoned us. He's not with us anymore. Now, God had literally just said that it's actually the other way around. Israel had abandoned God. But the way Gideon sees it, God has abandoned Israel. This dichotomy also calls to mind the Song of Moses from Deuteronomy 32, in which Moses prophesies of a time that the people would abandon God by turning to idols and false gods, and that God in turn would reject the people. And that's exactly what's happened at the beginning of Judges chapter 6. Yet the Song of Moses also prophesies hope in the form of vindication and deliverance and victory. And we see that hope actually play out in the story of Gideon, and we're already seeing the beginnings in this text from Judges chapter 6. A conversation ensues between God and Gideon asks for a sign in verse 17. Something to confirm that he's really talking to God, that God is really with him. And in the following verses, Gideon brings a sacrifice, and the angel touches the sacrifice with the tip of his staff, and the entire sacrifice is consumed by fire. This is the sign for Gideon. This confirms to Gideon that he really is speaking to the Lord. But more than that, God's acceptance of Gideon's offering confirms that God is on their side. Israel had strayed so far, and God had handed them over to their enemies. And so Gideon was questioning whether God was on their side or not. We see this a lot of times in the prophets, where we're told that because Israel had strayed, God would not accept their worship. And so Gideon, wondering if God really is on their side, brings an offering, brings this act of worship to make sure that it's accepted and that the people are accepted by God. And so for God to accept Gideon's sacrifice is a sign that God is really with them, as he has said. And for Gideon to present a sacrifice and for God to accept it is the renewal of a covenant between them. And in response to this covenant, Gideon tears down the Asherah pole and the altar to Baal, and he builds a proper altar to the Lord, all according to the Lord's instruction. And the people weren't very happy about it. They start asking around who did this. They form a mob. They want to kill him. But ultimately they deferred their anger, and Gideon began preparing for battle. But first, Gideon has another conversation with God before he goes to war. Pick up in verse 36 of Judges 6. Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said." And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, "Do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece. But this time make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with dew." That night God did so. Only the fleece was dry. All the ground was covered with dew. Gideon had already tested God. Prove that you really are God. Prove that you're on our side by accepting my sacrifice. But here he tests God again, not once but twice, and he even admits that he's testing God in verse 39. Prove that you're capable of fulfilling your promise to us. And now do it again. Prove that you're really going to do what you say you're going to do. And God is patient with Gideon's little games, and he does everything that Gideon asks of him. But the real proof comes in chapter 7 when they actually face the Midianites. Gideon has managed to assemble 32,000 men. The Midianite army is 135,000 strong. The Israelites are outnumbered about 4-1. Now that's probably why Gideon was so concerned with testing God in chapter 6. He knows victory is only possible with God's help because they are so outnumbered. But now it's God's turn to test Gideon. In Judges chapter 7 and verse 2, the Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me." In other words, Gideon has had a lot of doubts about God, which we've seen in all these tests from chapter 6. But now God is going to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that he's the one doing this. And to do that, he takes away every humanly possible means of success. He whittles this army down to 10,000. And then that's still too many men. So he further sifts through the men until there are only 300 left. The Israelites are now outnumbered 450-1. With such few numbers going into battle, you might expect them to be heavily armed with swords and shields and spears, but no. According to Judges 7:16, each man got a trumpet and a jar that had a torch hidden inside of it but was otherwise empty. God literally took away every possible means of winning this battle. They have no weapons. They don't have the numbers. There's no way for them to win this battle except God. And that's the point. Now you and all the world will know that God is who he says he is, and that he's on your side, and that he can and will fulfill his promises. And the tables have turned. This is now a test for Gideon and the 300 Israelites with him. Do you trust God? Prove your faith. We all find ourselves in this position from time to time, in an impossible situation, and there's really nothing we can do. Yet we all, and I'm preaching to myself here too, somehow find something to do anyway. We try to find some way to make it work, to try and force it, manipulate it, get the situation back into our control. And I usually realize that I didn't accomplish a single thing. To be honest, I usually make it worse. Or at best, I just give myself more anxiety while not having the least effect on the situation. But it's these moments where we're not in control that we're called to trust God. Let him do the work. And that's what Gideon's having to do in Judges 7. He reveals the plan in verses 17 and 18. Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp blow yours and shout for the Lord and for Gideon. Now wait a minute. For the Lord and for Gideon? Has Gideon forgotten the whole point of decreasing the size of the army and not using conventional weapons? Has he forgotten that God wanted to take away every possible means of them claiming my own strength has saved me? But now he wants his name shouted alongside God's. Interesting. Anyway, they followed through with the plan. In the middle of the night, they surrounded the camp and blew the trumpets, smashed the jars, and exposed the torches, and shouted, for the Lord and for Gideon. The Midianites weren't expecting to be attacked at night. They were unprepared, and the noise made it seem like the army surrounding them was a lot bigger than 300 men, and God threw them into confusion so that they began attacking each other, and they fled. God did his thing. The 300 Israelites didn't even have to move. And it was all because Gideon trusted God. He had come a long way from Judges 6, where he repeatedly doubted and tested God. This is why Gideon is commended for his faith in Hebrews 11. And that's usually where we stop reading. We ended on a high note and conclude that Gideon was a good guy. What a great ending to the story. If only that were the actual end of the story. But Judges 7 still isn't over, and Judges 8 is also all about Gideon. When the Midianites fled, Gideon's men called for all the rest of Israel to join them. Turns out they had forgotten that God intentionally kept their army small. Now they've got the entire army of Israel pursuing the Midianites, and they managed to kill most, but not quite all of them yet. At the beginning of chapter 8, the Ephraimites confronted Gideon and asked, why have you treated us like this? Why didn't you call us when you went to fight Midian? And they challenged him vigorously. Now you would think that this line of questioning would jog Gideon's memory, and he would remember, oh yeah, I didn't call you because God told me I already had too many men, and he made me get rid of 30,000 of the soldiers I had. He wanted me to trust him and let him do all the work. But that's not Gideon's response. In verses 2 and 3, he answered them, what have I accomplished compared to you? Aren't the gleanings of Ephraim's grapes better than the full grape harvest of Abiezer? That's Gideon's clan, Abiezer. God gave Oreb and Zeb, the Midianite leaders, into your hands. What was I able to do compared to you? At this, their resentment against him subsided. Gideon began the battle by trusting God and letting him fight the battle. God wanted it to be that way so that Gideon and the Israelites wouldn't think they did it on their own. The problem is that Gideon invited these other guys into the fight, and now they've done something which blurred the lines between God's action and man's action. So it appears, at least from Gideon's perspective, that people did this, and Gideon left God out of the equation. Gideon ended up having the very attitude that God had been trying to prevent, and Gideon became jealous. What's in it for me? Where's my glory? So Gideon kept up the pursuit. 2 of the Midianite kings had managed to escape. They still hadn't been captured. They had evaded and outmatched and outwitted the Israelites so far. So to Gideon, they were the prize. They're the best of the Midianites. The last chance for Gideon to accomplish something. And they did. They managed to capture and kill that last force of 15,000 men. And Gideon managed to claim some glory for himself. In verse 22, the Israelites asked Gideon to rule over them because he had delivered them from the hand of Midian. Now they had forgotten God and left him out of the equation, giving all the credit to Gideon. Gideon's response sounds promising in verse 23. I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. But in verse 24 he adds, I have one request, that each of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder. I'm not your king, but I'll accept your gifts. I'll accept this gold you've managed to collect. And they each gave him an earring, and he managed to collect 1,700 shekels. That's 43 pounds. That's a lot of earrings. And in verse 27, Gideon made the gold into an ephod, that is an idol, which he placed in Ophrah, his town. All Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. And to top it all off, in verse 31, his concubine who lived in Shechem also bore him a son whom he named Abimelech. Fun fact, the name Abimelech means my father is king. Remember, I am not your king, God is your king. I will not rule over you, God shall rule over you. Well, clearly he didn't mean that, because naming his son, my father is king, is really just a roundabout, clever way of saying, I am your king. You know, I think if we were to ask Gideon the highlight of his career, I think he would probably answer, that time me and God combined to kill 135,000 Midianites. Although he paid lip service to what God had done, he still sought and accepted the credit for himself. And he was led astray by his own ego in his quest for personal glory. The story of Gideon concludes in Judges 8, verses 33 through 35. No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. They set up Baal-Berith as their god and did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. They also failed to show any loyalty to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in spite of all the good things he had done for them. The people forgot Gideon, just as they had forgotten God. And they turned back to idols, the first of which Gideon himself had constructed with the spoils of his war with the Midianites. The story began with doubt, which eventually transformed into trust. And Gideon's faith paid off. There's a lesson for us there, an example for us to emulate. Yet there's also a warning. Because when his faith led to success, how quickly his confidence became hubris and God was forgotten. Gideon became the person he claimed not to be. He became the very thing he first sought to destroy. And Gideon perpetuated the cycle of sin and punishment that we see throughout the book of Judges. People sinned and were punished. Gideon led them back to God and on to deliverance. And then he led them right back into sin again. Some questions to consider as we close. Are we trusting in God or are we doubting Him? Are we letting God be God? Or are we trying to take control for ourselves? Are we giving God the glory or are we taking credit for ourselves? Is our worship genuine or is it merely lip service? Are we laying ourselves on the altar of thanksgiving or are we lifting ourselves up on a pedestal? The story of Gideon shows us that the answers to those questions may not be as clear-cut or as pleasant as we would like them to be. It's not enough to just verbalize the right answers to those questions, but our lives have to align with our words. So the answers to those questions begin with a close self-examination. Like with Gideon, I think a lot of people think of him as a great guy, a good leader of Israel, because on the surface, he says the right things and he does the right things. But when we look at the bigger picture and when we dig deeper, we also see that he does the wrong things. And his actions don't align with his words. We've got to dig deeper with ourselves too. The good news is, as I've already mentioned, Gideon, despite all his faults, was commended for his faith in Hebrews 11. In fact, all of the people commended in Hebrews 11 were flawed people. Yet Hebrews 12 tells us that we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, talking about all these people, imperfect people with imperfect faith who are listed in Hebrews 11. So let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, always striving to do better and to be more like Jesus. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Such commendations don't excuse the bad behavior, but it shows us that God can redeem and still use and work through imperfect people like us through faith in his perfect Son. And we're all in this race together. Those who have gone on before us, including Gideon, according to the Hebrews writer, are cheering us on. And we're here to cheer each other on and to help each other along the way. So this morning, if you need anything in this journey of faith, prayer or encouragement or Bible study or baptism, whatever your need may be, we want to help you however we can. Will you come as we stand and sing?